Welcome back to Fusty Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Rain swept across the London pavement as Grace Walker clutched her worn leather folder, praying she'd reach the interview before 9. Just as she crossed the curb, a black Rolls-Royce roared past, sending a wave of muddy water across her cream blouse and skirt. Shock froze her. Rage followed. The car screeched to a halt, and out stepped Desmond Blake, tall, dark-skinned, impeccably dressed, his umbrella shielding only himself. When Grace shouted at him, he offered a cold smirk and a dismissive, "Accidents happen." Humiliation burned through her as onlookers stared. By the time she changed and arrived at the office, the interview panel had already left. It was her final chance to escape part-time jobs and poverty, gone because of one arrogant stranger. That evening, Grace sat in her small Brixton flat, wiping the stains from her blouse as city lights flickered through the cracked window. She replayed the scene, wishing she'd shouted louder. The humiliation wasn't just the mud, it was the mockery in his eyes. Somewhere across town, Desmond poured himself a drink in his penthouse, unaware that the woman he'd splashed would soon shake the foundations of his pride. Fate had marked their collision. Neither knew it had only begun. 3 days later, Grace balanced coffee trays at Camden Corner Cafe, her temporary lifeline. When the door chimed and a familiar tall figure entered, her heart nearly stopped. Desmond Blake again, this time in casual navy and gold cufflinks. He didn't recognize her immediately. To him, she was just another server. But when she placed his order, their eyes met, and something flickered, surprise, maybe guilt. "You," she said softly, anger under control. Desmond raised an eyebrow, remembering the muddy street. "Still upset about your little accident?" he teased. The arrogance stabbed deep, but Grace forced a smile and walked away, dignity intact. What she didn't notice was Desmond's gaze following her, thoughtful now, as though seeing her properly for the first time. After paying his bill, Desmond lingered outside the cafe, rain dripping from the awning. He'd built his empire by controlling every outcome, yet this woman unsettled him. Her poise, despite humiliation, intrigued him. Later that night, he called his assistant. "Find out who the manager is. I want her in my office tomorrow." He told himself it was compensation, but deep down, curiosity had replaced cruelty. Grace had no idea that the man who ruined her interview would soon offer her the job that would change everything. When Grace arrived at Blake Holdings the next morning, she nearly turned back after spotting Desmond's name on the reception sign. The receptionist led her to the top floor where he waited, radiating quiet power. "Miss Walker," he said, voice smooth, "I owe you for that mishap. I'd like to offer you a position in my company." Grace blinked, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "You humiliated me, and now you want to hire me?" Desmond leaned back, amused. "Think of it as compensation or opportunity. The choice is yours." Pride battled desperation. The rent was due, and her options were gone. Against every instinct, she signed the contract. Back at her small flat, Grace stared at the document. Working for the man who'd mocked her felt like a betrayal of self-respect. Yet something inside urged her to face him on her own terms. She vowed silently, "I'll never let him make me feel small again." Somewhere in his penthouse, Desmond smiled to himself. He thought he'd done her a favor. He didn't realize he'd just hired the one woman who would humble him before the world. The first week at Blake Holdings was war. Grace worked in the marketing department under Claudia Bennett, a sharp-tongued executive with crimson lipstick and colder eyes. Desmond treated Grace with detached professionalism, sometimes offering guidance, other times ignoring her completely. Yet beneath the chill, there were moments of warmth, a lingering look during a board presentation, a word of praise whispered too quietly. Grace told herself not to care, but her heart disobeyed. Late nights reviewing reports blurred into accidental smiles. Claudia noticed everything. She'd once shared Desmond's bed and couldn't stand his attention drifting elsewhere. One evening she warned Grace, "Men like him don't see girls like you. Stay in your lane." Grace met her gaze calmly. "I'm here to work, not to please him." But deep down the tension grew. Between ambition, jealousy, and pride, a storm brewed quietly on the 40th floor, one that would soon test every boundary they had. It happened during a product launch rehearsal. Grace tripped over a loose cable, and before she hit the ground, Desmond caught her. Their eyes locked, hers wide with shock, his unreadable. The air thickened, and for a heartbeat the whole room disappeared. "Careful," he murmured. steadying her. Claudia, watching from across the hall, clenched her jaw. The tabloids had called Desmond the Ice King of London finance, but Grace had just melted the first layer. That night she couldn't sleep. The feel of his hand still lingered on her arm. Desmond, too, found himself distracted. For years he'd buried emotion beneath work. Yet this woman, ordinary, humble, had stirred something dangerously human. He sent her roses anonymously, pretending it was corporate appreciation. Grace knew it was him. She should have thrown them out, but instead she smiled faintly, whispering, "Maybe there's more to him after all." Love was creeping in where pride once lived. By the second month, rumors spread through Blake Holdings like wildfire. Colleagues whispered that Grace had seduced her way to the top. Claudia fueled the gossip, smirking each time Grace passed. One afternoon, Grace overheard two assistants mocking her. She almost cried, but when Desmond entered the room, she straightened her spine and continued working. "Walker," he said softly after the meeting, "ignore them." His concern was genuine, but she met his eyes coolly. "Easy for you to say. You'll still have your reputation tomorrow." Desmond's silence revealed guilt he couldn't name. That evening, Claudia cornered Desmond in his office, draped in perfume and resentment. "She's ruining your image," she hissed. Desmond's jaw tightened. "Enough, Claudia. Focus on your work." It was the first time he dismissed her, and humiliation burned through her veins. That night she made a decision. If she couldn't have him, she'd destroy the woman who did. The quarterly board meeting was Grace's chance to prove herself. She'd spent weeks perfecting the financial projections for a major partnership. Minutes before presentation, Claudia accidentally swapped her flash drive. When Grace's slides appeared, they were filled with errors and missing figures. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Desmond's expression turned to stone. "This is unacceptable," he snapped. Grace tried to explain, but he cut her off in front of everyone. "You've embarrassed this company. You're suspended until further notice." His words sliced through her like knives. Grace left the building with tears hidden behind sunglasses. For the first time since joining, she felt truly defeated. Oliver found her outside and tried to comfort her, but she could only whisper, "He never believed in me." That night, Desmond sat alone in his penthouse, replaying her face in his mind, hurt, betrayed, and proud even in pain. Something inside him twisted, though he didn't yet understand why. Days turned into weeks. Grace took temporary work at a small consultancy, determined not to drown in shame. Meanwhile, Blake Holdings buzzed with tension. Even Desmond's investors noticed his distraction. Oliver began digging quietly, convinced Grace's innocence. Late one night, he discovered surveillance footage showing Claudia tampering with the USB drive. Shock gave way to fury. He confronted Desmond the next morning. "You punished the wrong person." Desmond watched the footage, face hardening with guilt. Without hesitation, he ordered security to escort Claudia out. That evening, at a charity gala, Desmond spotted Grace, serving as a volunteer coordinator. The sight of her laughing with children cracked something inside him. Taking the microphone unexpectedly, he said, "There's someone here tonight I wronged deeply. Grace Walker, I owe you an apology before the entire city." Gasps filled the hall. Grace froze, heart pounding, tore between vindication and sorrow. His apology came too late. Trust once shattered is not easily rebuilt. Claudia wasn't finished. Using contacts inside the company, she fabricated evidence framing Grace for leaking confidential data. Within hours, Grace was summoned again. Desmond's voice, though pained, was firm. "I have to suspend you pending investigation." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "After everything? You still don't trust me." This time she didn't cry. She simply turned and walked out, leaving him standing in silence. The weight of his choices crushed him. As tabloids splashed headlines about the CEO's scandalous assistant, Grace disappeared from public view, but Oliver kept searching. He traced the forged emails back to Claudia's laptop, now hidden in her flat. Determined to right every wrong, he collected irrefutable evidence and prepared to show Desmond the truth that would shatter his arrogance forever. When Oliver presented the evidence, Desmond's world stopped. The woman he'd trusted twice had betrayed him, and the one he condemned had been innocent all along. "What have I done?" he whispered. Without waiting, he called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stood before the world, voice shaking slightly. "Grace Walker is innocent. Every accusation against her was false. I failed her as a leader and as a man. His confession trended across media within hours, painting him not as a villain, but as a repentant soul. Grace watched the broadcast from her small flat, tears streaking her cheeks. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the arrogance, broken, remorseful, human. But forgiveness would take time. As the city buzzed with sympathy for her and curiosity about their story, Desmond vowed silently, "I'll earn her trust again, no matter how long it takes." And somewhere in her heart, Grace whispered, maybe redemption is possible if he truly means it. Weeks passed after Desmond's public apology, but Grace refused to answer his calls. She needed space to breathe, to remember who she was before him. The tabloids painted her as a wronged woman, and though the sympathy felt vindicating, it couldn't heal the ache of betrayal. In her quiet Brixton apartment, she spent nights rewriting her resume, trying to rebuild the pieces of a career burned by someone else's mistrust. Meanwhile, Desmond roamed his penthouse like a ghost. Every morning he stared at the skyline that once symbolized victory, but now mocked his loneliness. What success, he wondered, if the one person who believed in you is gone? Oliver encouraged him to give her time. "She doesn't need your words right now, Desmond. She needs proof." That sentence struck deep. Desmond redirected his energy, funding women in business initiatives, launching scholarship programs, and implementing integrity audits at Blake Holdings. He didn't do it for press. He did it because Grace's honesty had changed him. Across town, Grace saw his reforms in papers, but refused to let hope soften her heart. Good deeds don't erase pain, she told herself. Yet every time she saw his name, her pulse betrayed her. 3 months later, fate intervened again. Grace attended a corporate networking event hosted by a charity she joined as a volunteer consultant. When she arrived, dressed in a simple navy gown and natural curls, she drew admiring glances, none stronger than from Desmond Blake, who hadn't expected to see her there. For a moment, neither moved. He finally approached, voice lower, softer. "Grace, you look incredible." She met his gaze coolly. "You look like someone who's learned humility." The comment stung, yet her tone carried no malice, only honesty. Throughout the night, he followed her with his eyes as she mingled confidently with executives. When a rival CEO tried to flirt with her, Desmond's jealousy betrayed his restraint. Later, as she prepared to leave, he offered to walk her out. "Please," he said, "not as your boss. Just as a man who's sorry." Grace hesitated, then nodded. Outside under the drizzle, the London skyline shimmered behind them. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she whispered, "but I do see the change." Desmond smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep proving it, one day at a time." True to his word, Desmond didn't chase her with extravagance. Instead, he appeared in quiet places, donating to her charity events anonymously, sending reading materials he knew she needed for projects, even volunteering in an orphanage she supported, in rolled-up sleeves and muddy boots, not a tailored suit. Grace noticed a transformation, but kept her distance. "He's doing this for redemption, not for me," she told Oliver during lunch one day. Oliver smiled knowingly. "Maybe both." At Blake Holdings, staff whispered about the CEO's new humility. Gone was the man who barked orders. In his place was a leader who listened. When Grace visited the company for a project pitched months later, employees greeted her with admiration. The same board members who once mocked her now rose to shake her hand. As she exited the meeting, Desmond caught her at the elevator. "I meant what I said that night," he told her gently. "You changed me, Grace. Whether you forgive me or not, I'll be grateful for that forever." Her heart trembled, but she managed a calm reply. "Change means nothing if it fades when I'm gone." Just as life began to stabilize, Blake Holdings faced a new crisis. An international partner attempted a hostile takeover, exploiting internal chaos from Claudia's earlier scandal. Investors panicked, and media vultures circled. Grace read the headlines and felt an old ache. She'd once belonged to that world. That night, Desmond appeared on live television, owning every past mistake and pledging to protect his employees' futures. His honesty earned public respect. But behind closed doors, the pressure was suffocating. When Grace visited the office to deliver a charity partnership proposal, she found Desmond pale, exhausted, and surrounded by crisis documents. Despite herself, concern overtook pride. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said. He smiled wearily. "Haven't had a reason to." She helped him review the reports late into the night, their old rhythm returning, teamwork built on trust. For the first time in months, they laughed. The city outside was asleep when Desmond whispered, "You didn't have to come." Grace looked up and said softly, "I know, but I wanted to." The next morning, the world woke to news. The takeover had failed. Desmond's transparent leadership had saved the company. Grace, though officially an outsider, had been instrumental behind the scenes, and the board took notice. During a press briefing, Desmond acknowledged her contribution publicly, calling her the heartbeat of integrity that inspired this company's renewal. Cameras flashed, and Grace froze in shock as reporters turned to her. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was respect. Later that day, Desmond approached her privately. "I don't want to just fix the company. I want to fix us." Grace stared at him, torn between reason and emotion. "You broke something that doesn't mend easily," she said quietly. "But maybe—" She hesitated, the words trembling. "Maybe there's a start." That night, she found a single white rose on her doorstep with a note that read, "One day at a time, D." For the first time in a year, she smiled without pain. Over the next few months, Grace and Desmond rebuilt something fragile yet real. They went on modest walks through Hyde Park, shared coffee instead of champagne, and talked about everything except the past. Desmond confessed his fears of losing control, of loving wrongly, of not deserving a second chance. Grace listened, realizing he wasn't the same man who'd splashed her with mud months ago. She began to lower her walls, little by little. One evening, as autumn leaves fell, he reached for her hand. "You taught me what respect feels like," he said softly. "Now let me show you what love should be." Grace's eyes glistened under the golden streetlights. "Love isn't grand gestures, Desmond," she whispered. "It's consistency." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Then I'll be consistent every day for the rest of my life." In that moment, forgiveness became more than a word. It became a quiet beginning. When news broke that Claudia had fled to Spain but was arrested for embezzlement, the media reignited Grace's story. Paparazzi crowded her doorstep, dragging up headlines of humiliation and scandal. Desmond offered to send security, but she refused. "I don't want to hide anymore," she said firmly. Together they faced the public, attending an interview where Grace spoke openly about resilience and forgiveness. Her grace under pressure captivated the audience, and Desmond, that night after the interview, he confessed, "I used to think power was about control. Now I know it's about accountability." Grace smiled. "You finally sound human." He chuckled, pulling her gently into an embrace. For the first time, she didn't pull away. The storm that had once torn them apart had become the reason they finally stood side by side. Spring arrived with soft rain and clearer skies. Grace's consultancy flourished, her name now synonymous with integrity. Desmond supported her quietly, investing in her firm through independent partners so she could thrive without owing him anything. When she discovered the truth, she confronted him. "Why didn't you tell me?" He smiled shyly. "Because this time, I wanted you to win on your own terms." That selflessness broke through her last offense. Later, they met on the rooftop of Blake Holdings where it had all begun. "Do you remember first day?" he asked. Grace laughed. "You splashed me with mud." He chuckled. "Still one of my greatest mistakes." "And maybe one of my best blessings," she admitted softly, under the fading sunlight. Their laughter melted into silence, and Desmond brushed a stray curl from her face. The distance between them, emotional and physical, finally disappeared. Months later, at a charity gala celebrating women entrepreneurs, Grace delivered the keynote speech. She spoke about perseverance, humility, and unexpected love, her words echoing to the grand hall. As the applause thundered, Desmond stepped onto the stage. The crowd hushed. "There was once a woman who taught me that love without trust is a lie," he said, voice thick with emotion, "and that forgiveness is the greatest luxury of all." Then, before hundreds of witnesses, he dropped to one knee and opened a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught. The diamond was enormous. It was elegant, understated, just like their love. "Grace Walker," he said, "will you marry me? Not the man I was, but the one I'm still learning to be?" Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Yes, Desmond Blake," she whispered, "but only if you promise never to drive near puddles again." Laughter and applause filled the room as he slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing the most poetic redemption London had ever seen. Their wedding was intimate, a blend of elegance and simplicity. Grace wore ivory silk, her dark skin glowing beneath the lantern lights of a small garden in Surrey. Desmond waited at the altar, nervous yet peaceful. When she walked toward him, the past seemed to fade completely. "I splashed mud," he whispered when she reached him. "And I found gold," she replied, smiling through tears. The guests laughed softly, moved by the beauty of their story. Later that night, under the starlit sky, they danced alone as music drifted from the garden. Desmond looked into her eyes. "You were my redemption," he said. Grace shook her head gently. "No, you chose your own. I just reminded you who you could be." He kissed her forehead, the city lights flickering far below. In that moment, the girl once covered in mud had become a queen in her own right, and the billionaire who once broke her had learned what it meant to kneel, not in defeat, but in love. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.